I've always been drawn to the allure of the open road, especially in the Philippines. The country's tangled network of highways and byways has always had a mystique about it, and I often found solace in taking late-night drives. Little did I know that one particular night would change my perception of these roads forever. It was a moonless night when I set out on my journey, driving along the infamous Highway 666. The air was heavy with humidity, and the chirping of crickets filled the void of the night. My old, battered car's headlights cut through the darkness like a knife, revealing only a few feet ahead. The road was eerily deserted, not a single soul in sight. As I continued down the highway, the silence was broken by a faint whisper, almost drowned out by the engine's hum. I strained my ears to listen, and the whisper grew into a chorus of voices, indistinguishable but hauntingly familiar. It was as if the very road itself was speaking, telling stories of those who had passed this way before. Goosebumps prickled my arms, but curiosity propelled me forward. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the side of the road, seemingly out of nowhere. I slammed on the brakes, and my heart pounded as I watched the figure draw closer in my headlights. It was a young woman, dressed in a tattered white dress that swayed ominously in the wind. Her long, unkempt hair covered most of her face, obscuring her features. Her eyes, though, were visible, empty, soulless voids that seemed to pierce through me. Instinctively, I rolled down the window and asked if she needed help. Her voice, when she spoke, sent shivers down my spine. It was hollow as though it echoed from another world. She begged me for a ride, her words dripping with desperation. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door, and she climbed in without a word. The car felt colder, and the air grew heavy with an otherworldly presence. I dared not look at her directly. My gaze fixated on the road ahead. The whispers returned, louder now, and I realized they were coming from her. She muttered incomprehensible phrases, each word carrying a sinister weight. Fear gripped me, but I couldn't bring myself to stop the car. As we drove on, the surroundings transformed into an eerie, otherworldly landscape. The moon, which had been absent from the sky, suddenly emerged, casting an eerie glow on everything. The trees twisted and contorted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The road itself seemed to elongate endlessly. I glanced at the woman, and her face was no longer hidden by her hair. Her eyes were bloodshot and filled with anguish. She stared at me, a malevolent grin stretching across her face, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Terrified, I demanded to know who she was and what she wanted. She laughed, a haunting sound that reverberated through my very soul. "I am the highway's keeper," she hissed. "I collect lost souls who dare to tread this path." Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of my situation. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, desperate to escape this nightmare. The woman screeched, her voice now a banshee's wail, and her grip on my arm tightened. As I sped down the endless highway, the whispers grew louder, tormenting me with the stories of those who had met their doom on this cursed road. My vision blurred, and the world around me twisted and distorted. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman vanished, leaving behind nothing but a chilling laughter that echoed in the wind. I drove for what felt like an eternity, my mind unraveling, until I finally reached the end of Highway 666. I parked my car by the side of the road, trembling and disoriented. I knew I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, and I vowed never to venture onto that cursed highway again. Growing up in the Philippines, I had heard countless stories about Balete Drive in Manila. The road was notorious for its supernatural occurrences, and I was always skeptical, until the night that changed everything. It was a stormy evening when I decided to drive along Balete Drive. Rain lashed against my windshield, and the thunder roared like an angry giant. Lightning illuminated the road ahead, revealing the massive Balete tree that gave the street its name. The tree's gnarled branches seemed to reach out like skeletal arms. As I drove past the Balete tree, I saw a figure standing at the side of the road, drenched in rain. I slowed down, and to my surprise, it was a woman, her clothes clinging to her body. She had her thumb out, signaling for a ride. Feeling a pang of sympathy, I pulled over and rolled down the window. The woman climbed into my car, her face obscured by a hood. She gave me an address, and her voice was soft and trembling. She seemed so normal, just a weary traveler seeking shelter from the storm. We drove in silence for a while, the rain continuing to pour relentlessly. I couldn't help but notice that the woman's reflection in the rearview mirror seemed odd. Her face was still hidden, and her presence seemed to cast no shadow. I finally mustered the courage to ask her a question. "Are you okay?" I inquired, my voice shaky. She didn't respond at first, and then, with a sigh, she removed her hood. I nearly lost control of the car when I saw her face, or rather the lack of it. The woman had no facial features, just a smooth, pale expanse of skin where her eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Terrified, I slammed on the brakes and demanded that she get out of my car. She laughed, a haunting, distorted sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You shouldn't have stopped for me," she whispered. Before I could react, she vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a chilling coldness that seemed to seep into my bones. I sped away from Ballet Drive, my heart pounding in my chest. Later, I researched the legend of Ballet Drive and discovered that the phantom hitchhiker I'd encountered was a common sighting. Locals believed that she was a vengeful spirit who would appear to unsuspecting travelers during stormy nights. It was said that if you didn't turn your gaze away, you would be forever cursed. I count myself lucky to have escaped with my life, but the memory of that faceless woman haunts my dreams to this day. Quezon Province, with its lush landscapes and quaint towns, had always been a favorite destination for weekend getaways. But one fateful night, I would come to learn that its beauty concealed a darker, more sinister secret. I was driving alone, the winding roads of Quezon Province taking me deeper into the heart of the countryside. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the landscape. I had heard stories about a crossroads deep within the province, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred. As I approached the crossroads, I noticed a flickering light in the distance. It seemed to be coming from an old, dilapidated chapel at the intersection. I couldn't resist the urge to investigate, so I parked my car and approached the chapel cautiously. Inside, the chapel was in disrepair, its walls covered in moss and decay. Flickering light led me to an altar where a single candle burned, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In front of the altar, I saw a wooden cross, weathered and worn. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chapel, a mournful, ethereal melody that sent chills down my spine. I turned toward the source of the sound and saw a figure, dressed in tattered robes, kneeling in front of the cross. It was an old man, his face hidden in the shadows. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. Instead, he continued to chant in a language I couldn't understand, his voice growing louder and more desperate. As I approached him, I noticed that his skin was pallid, almost translucent, and his eyes were milky white. Fear gnawed at me, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from the spectacle before me. The old man's chanting grew more frenzied, and suddenly, the wooden cross before him began to shake and emit an eerie, greenish light. A sense of impending doom washed over me, and I turned to flee the chapel. But as I reached the doorway, a bone-chilling gust of wind slammed the door shut, trapping me inside. The old man's chanting reached a deafening crescendo, and the cross levitated off the ground, hovering in midair. I screamed as the chapel seemed to come alive, its walls groaning and shifting. Shadows danced on the walls, taking on grotesque, nightmarish forms. The very air seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy. Desperation overcame me, and I charged toward the old man, knocking him aside and grabbing the cross. As soon as I touched it, a blinding light enveloped me, and the chapel shook with fury. Then, everything went black. When I awoke, I found myself outside the chapel, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. The chapel had returned to its decrepit state, and there was no sign of the old man or the supernatural phenomena. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night, but I know that I had stumbled upon a cursed crossroads in Quezon Province. I am forever haunted by the memory of that chapel and the terror that unfolded within its walls.